Welcome everybody. This is Natasha Ginwala, co-artistic director of the 13th Gwangju Biennale, Minds Rising, Spirits Tuning. We are here in the first gallery of the historic Biennale Hall that has been used since 1995 as the primary venue of the Gwangju Biennale. Our title, Minds Rising, Spirits Tuning, was in fact interpreted by the esteemed nun and chef Zhuang Quan of Bekangsa Temple. We are here and ready presenting to you the Biennale from the ground floor, which is used for the very first time as a social space. Of course, following with the change during the pandemic, we have still continued to create a very special space for circulation, for a convivial atmosphere, really thinking of Gwangju residents, in particular young people such as yourself, to be inspired and think through the many ways in which the communal mind and collective intelligence operates throughout our societies of today.
Hi everyone, and my name is Defne Ayas. I'm the other co-artistic director of the Gwangju Biennale. Natasha and I, we've been on the journey of making this exhibition for you all, for the Gwangju publics, Korea publics as well, over the last 2 years, and it's been quite an uphill challenge, as you can imagine, through the pandemic conditions, but also a privilege. So we cannot wait to share this exhibition, especially this space downstairs, which is free to access to all of you to come, to play, to think, to speculate in this space. So you're welcome to use it anytime as students, as teachers. We've really kept this in mind when we were creating it. So there were several notions that drove to our curatorial inquiry when we set out to do this exhibition. The main theme was intelligence. Intelligence, the relationship between organic and cybernetic, between human intelligence and non-human intelligence, between artificial intelligence and organic intelligence. So the dichotomy is actually a very contrived one, and across Asia, but also across the rest of the world, there are many ways of reading what constitutes intelligence and finding productive realities, but also vocabularies of resistance and healing and renewal as you address the topic of intelligence. So when Natasha and I, we set out to explore this topic of intelligence, of extended mind, we wanted to bring together many artists and thinkers, including scientists, including system thinkers, together to think together what constitutes today how we're perceiving our brain, how we're perceiving our heart, where are we thinking, how are we imagining, where are we speaking from, and how are we contending with the volatile presence of this world, with what vocabularies. At times it's visual, at times it's theoretical, at times it's based on word, and you have your own vocabularies as well as you deal with the daily realities of this world. So we wanted to bring these ideas together and share it with you.
We are now standing with the works of Min Jung-ki, senior artist based in Seoul, who has been part of the first edition of the Gwangju Biennale. Defne Ayas and I invited Min Jung-ki very early on during our process. We were deeply inspired by some of his historical works, expressing the realist tradition, but also very importantly, the social history of Korea, taking account of colonization, taking account of rural life, agrarian struggles, and reading, as you can see here, with the Mudungsan Mountain, the spirituality of Korea coming from various traditions, whether those are shamanic, Buddhist, Taoist, and all of these are manifested within his paintings, and the way that he walks the landscape, he also paints the landscape in that way. So you have the geological, the poetical, and the spiritual manifesting in these paintings. You have hidden garden, you have pavilions, gardens, waterfalls, markings of pavilions for literary circles, storytellers, poets, and so these are all mapped within his paintings, also referencing historic Korean maps and cartographic traditions that have been silenced or oppressed or erased in many ways. And so in a sense, his style is his iconographic style is very much borrowing from some of these currents that come from Korean and Asian traditions, and yet he is for us an extremely contemporary, worldly figure whom we are fortunate to work with, to have two large works for the very first time presented for free, really for free viewing to Korean audiences. And besides them, you see these 4 cardinal points that are marked with stone amulets that are from the collection of the Museum of Shamanism in Seoul. And so this is the kind of entwining between the historical and the contemporary that you will find across the Biennale Hall, drawing from historic collections of Korea and beyond. We are now besides the artwork of Uti Pieski, which is called Rising Together, Biavit. In fact, this also brings us to the title of the current gallery. And Uti has worked with a number of women collaborators in manifesting this suspended sculpture. It feels really like a fireball. It radiates energy across the gallery spaces. It is based on a scarf that is worn by Sami women, very much part of the indigenous attire of the Sami community, once more long suppressed by Nordic colonization processes, Christian evangelization, which try to homogenize and erase Sami identity. And therefore the terminology doji, which is not merely craft tradition but very much ancestral practice, a way of commoning knowledge and recognizing one's heritage and one's identity, is once again reinterpreted by Uti Pieski and several of her collaborators. Her work is also present in Gallery 2. We will not be showing you that, but in fact it takes up another part of Sami attire, which is called the horn hat, which is again worn specifically by women and is present within ethnological collections in Europe, which once again tells you about the long-term violence that has been carried out against this community. But here again we have this kind of optical abstract work which also brings in a harmonious and generative atmosphere within the Biennale.
So for us, really, this exhibition is scored in 5 parts. And this floor, we called it Rising to the Surface, Rising Together. We are really looking at various intelligence that are embedded in matriarchal cultures, in indigenous cultures, as Natasha Ginwala mentioned. And we also bring them together with artistic works that also explore much more maybe contemporary technological dynamics that are currently running our world. So could be algorithmic regimes, could be surveillance regimes, could be the gaming culture, online subcultures. So we're looking at various aspects of how these intelligences manifest in the land, in indigenous cultures, but also in the technosphere. In that regard, we've also invited from early on Gerard to join us in this exhibition inquiry. This is an artist that we also feel you're going to respond really well. He's been working with gaming engines that were, as you know, initially invented for military simulations. He is now working more and more with neural networks. He's not afraid to going into the latest, most cutting-edge technology when he's creating his work. That's his avant-garde in that sense. So in this work, he actually revived figures, 4 straw boys, as he calls them, from the Irish mythology, Celtic paganism. So in that sense, it's also from that land indigeneity that he draws from these figures. And they are actually lamenting, they come from a time where there was a more socially equitable and ecologically desirable world, right? And with this exhibition, we're also moving our forces towards a world that we want to go back to or go forward to that is ecologically more desirable. So by mobilizing these figures through the use of motion capturing, which means that he is drawing data from life, both in time and space, and recreating these figures that have neural networks embedded in them to lament and mourn a time when it was more of an ecologically desirable world. These corn figures can be found anywhere in the world. They can be found in Korea, they can be found also in Ireland, and they have a lot of references to, of course, agricultural ceremonies and wedding ceremonies and so forth. So this is a work that is actually installed in a mirror cube, stainless steel, and projected with a rare projection, and you can actually see these figures through 4 different seasons as they look at their relationship to the landscape of the river where they were initially constituted in Ireland. Gwangju Biennale is known for connecting, of course, Gwangju also to the international world and the international back to the city. We are having works by 69 artists in this exhibition and 40 new commissions, which means 40 new works have been created for this Biennale. Sang-dong Kim, a Seoul-based Korean artist, is somebody we invited from the outset onwards because his reading into Korean shamanism, into the indigenous cultures that have been ostracized in Korea, has been a key leitmotif, a guiding light for our inquiry. And he has created a new work for us for the Biennale Hall, which will also be included part of the procession we've organized for the exhibition. He is somebody who is not afraid of critiquing how Korea is subjected to hyper-capitalism, to aesthetics of hyper-consumption, but he is also a strong believer how we should actually, to restore the balance of things, to avoid the class divide that only got deepened by the pandemic conditions, to restore that, he believes that we should claim a little bit more the indigenous cultures that are existing all across Korea, but maybe not always in the metropolitan cities that we might be living in. So he has created a work here with funeral procession elements, sanyo, that you might be familiar of. And there's a lot of readings that can be done into this work. So he is activating many symbologies that your teachers will know and will tell you more about. He is recreating a phoenix. He is working with paper cuts. He is also working with shopping cart aesthetics, which is of course also referring to the hyper-consumption aesthetics that I just mentioned. So he is a key figure in this exhibition. You will also see his older works in our second floor, but also in Yangnim Mountain at Horangasai. So is a key artist to study.
We're now in Gallery 2, which is titled Kinship Between Mountains, Fields and Rivers. There are several artists here, but we will only highlight a few. In the back, you see the works of Pasita Abad. These are doors that she made in Yemen when visiting the streets of Yemen. Doors made of stained glass, of stone, of straw, of wood, handcrafted, also through many, many different travels that she made across the world. She was collecting various items. This is behind me. There are so many other works, including the work of Sang-dong Kim, which was on the ground floor, that Defne Ayas spoke about. We have in the background the drumming of Gwangju Chen and Marina Lee's shamanic drumming from Taiwan. We will now walk towards the left, where we have the work of Seni Kamara, Bad Fiji Gals. We have various paintings from the Shamanism Museum and the Gahue Museum in Seoul. These are folk paintings, popular painting traditions of Korea. We have ancient roof tile decorations. All of these are symbols of protection, of recovery, but also of the deep strength and the kinds of resistance building strategies that emerge from the landscape, from terrains, from fields, from mountains, from rivers. And that is what we highlight here. We also have a sense of the robotic and the engineered in that very landscape through the kinetic butterflies of Fernando Palma Rodriguez from Mexico. We have again OTPSK, as I mentioned. We have songs of the grind mill from the People's Archive of Rural India that you're very welcome to listen to these songs around the grind mill. We have the Juma Adi from Bali, from Java. He lives in Indonesia and Australia and is inspired by Balinese temple paintings and so forth. These are all of the different works that you will see when you visit. We're now going to go to see the work of Seni Kamara. Next to me is the work of Seni Kamara, a Senegalese sculptor living in rural Senegal between a forest and a river. And she has been making this kind of work in clay since a very, very young age. Her mother was also a potter. She is renowned in her village. A film on her has actually been shown in Oku Invasor's Venice Biennale, and yet this is the first time that Seni Kamara has been shown as a solo artist in a major contemporary art biennale in Asia, and we are extremely proud of that fact. Seni Kamara got lost in the forest with her 3 siblings. They're quadruplets, and she got lost in the forest when they went to pick wood and re-emerged a week later with clay in her hand. Ever since that time, she has been creating these majestic, nourishing ancestors, kind of superhumans, always privileging the matriarch, grandmother figures, the carrying forward the matrilineal line, and so you have the many hands, the many heads, all clinging together to one central body. And so in this we draw strength, we consider it a kind of empowered figuration made newly really for the Gwangju Biennale by the artist, shipped through pandemic times and all the way from Senegal. So please enjoy this work. This large banner is by Bad Fiji Girls, Quinchile Charan and Isha Pillai, Indo-Fijian duo who have been featured for the very first time in a major biennale. Their collective operates also very much through social media, so do catch their Instagram account. They have been working continually on following the trajectory of indentured laborers from India to Fiji who were actively tilling the land, working in exploitative conditions within sugarcane plantations especially. And so this history really has not been chronicled as many other kinds of indentured labor histories have. And so their work actually is also very much about bringing out these archives that have to do with forced labor conditions for really decades. The kinds of recordings also include, in fact, uprisings. So you have a labor strike from 1920 that was led by women. So in the machete, for instance, is not only a kind of tool for working in the plantation, it also becomes a weapon when necessary. So really, this work includes a banner. It includes also several others which are all the way coming from the ramp from the ground floor gallery to the top. There's a huge banner called "We do not have enough. We do not have enough to satisfy our bellies." So very much the call against hunger, the call against exploitation. Also in the background, you will hear the sound of a Maori song, which is part of the video work of Maori artist Shannon Te'au, who works with sonic traditions and proverbs of the Maori people, very much looking also at a specific proverb which references to the fact that the future is maybe the past and that the past may be something we are walking towards. So that is the sonic ambience, and as well you have further down 3 more banner works by Bad Fiji Girls.
Welcome to our Gallery 3. It's titled Bodies in Desire Beyond the Disciplinary Logic. Here we're looking at how our bodies have been conditioned by the expectations of the society, by the expectations of our families, or by the expectations of military aesthetics that are governing our everyday life. So what is beyond that disciplinary logic? and how artists are contending with their aesthetics to create forms of resistance. In this floor, we have explored the idea of also a tango, a duet between artists of the same generation where their works can be read in relation to each other in different parts of the world, whether in Gwangju or Chile, and how they've been actually creating works that were dealing, let's say, in this case of Sang-ho Lee and Cecilia Vitunia, with US imperial military politics in their respective regions.
So if we look a little bit more closer into the work of Sang-ho Lee, who was well-known protagonist of Gwangju, also an activist who directly witnessed the Gwangju uprising and participated in it, suffering physical and emotional trauma, he drew closer to Buddhist practice and meditation, which he continues in fact till today. But these practices have deeply taken on an intention and a vocabulary in his painterly practice, and that is really why he is very much at the crux of our thinking as well. And so you see here how he has participated in protests towards peace, towards denuclearization, against American imperialism, the role of the United States across in various parts of Korea's history, and the kinds of disruption and aggression that that has caused, the kinds of militaristic temperament that has in fact infiltrated generations of Korean minds. And so Sang-ho Lee's practice in fact merges that, brings that together with Buddhism, not in a pure way, because you also see how the soldier, the child, the family are very much woven into the arms of the Bodhisattva, who is trying to glean where a kind of harmonious balance can be reckoned with, where mourning, forgiveness, and peace can be acknowledged at a societal level. And that is what we are seeing here. Also, the kind of tensions between Korea and Japan, he's always featuring those transitions into his work. And so that also is featured within his paintings in certain ways.
So if you think of the Korean history, for instance, you know, whether it's the American missionaries who were here in 19th century, or if you think of the American military presence here now with the biggest US air base in the middle of Korea, or if you think of the Korean War and the American politics here, this was also the case in other parts of the world. So in that sense, Cecilia Vitunia is an important figure that we've also embraced with her artistic practice that basically sees not much difference between art and politics. She's a poet, she's a painter, she makes beautiful installations with indigenous fabrics that she knows about from Amazonian cultures. So she is, most of her painterly works are actually, can be read as poems as well, or you can actually see the relationship between poetry and painting in the way she composes the certain elements in her works.
And so in fact, there is a work, an audio work by Cecilia Vitunia at the Garden Pavilion in the Gwangju National Museum, which is a sonic commemoration to Ha Kyung-cha, who was brutally murdered before the two poet artists could have a meeting. And so in fact, here we have two bodies of work. We have this series of paintings also which show various dynamics of solidarity, the way that solidarity in fact flows. It does not move in one direction. And so you also have here, once again, the representation of animals that play a kind of predatory role, the way that oppression continues and the way that power is constantly pitching its harsh fangs out at various vulnerable communities and groups. You have also a kind of dancing skeleton, so that the threat of death is dancing in the presence of the army generals that are at the edge of the very painting, the one to my left. Also, way down at this gallery, at the very end, you see cloth banners, banner paintings, silk screen and cloth banner paintings that have been reproduced by Cecilia Vitunia, because a lot of her works were in fact lost or damaged as she traveled. And so in fact, she refers to herself as an abandoned figure. There is a lot of sense of grief in the way that her work was for decades not acknowledged. And so there's also a commitment to sometimes remake, revisit, build new relationships with her works from the 70s unto today. So those banners really also refer specifically to the solidarity between women in Vietnam and Chile after the Vietnam War and through Pinochet's dictatorship. Here we have behind us the work of Sian Dairit, artist based in the Philippines, who is also an activist working with agrarian communities, rural activists, many of whom have been imprisoned, disappeared, punished severely by the current regime of Duterte in the Philippines. Sian has been working very much with a kind of cartographic practices that study the landscape of the Philippines, minority histories, and erased sites. Behind us, though, you have work that is highly detailed. These are installation parts that refer to the genealogy of militarism, of Spanish colonization, imperial role of the United States, and the kind of neo-colonial strategies that use extractive forces to steal or to corrupt indigenous and locally owned lands and resources. Also the way that militarism has been used during the pandemic, in fact, to control the local population. And so here you have, in fact, individuals armed, wearing their hazmat suits and wearing their protection shields, and at the same time terrorizing communities on the ground in the Philippines. The role of also emblems, the kind of souvenirs that are used by these forces of power to create a sense of desire towards militaristic power. Because there's also a sense of desire, there's a sense of docile bodies, there's a sense of bowing before the power of the military might. And so CN uses uniforms, emblems, trophies, which really represent that sphere of operation and its powers. He works with wooden artisans, with embroiderers in the Philippines. So there's also kind of local traditional ways in which he collaborates in a very collective sense. His work is produced. So here you have Army Recruitment Office, you have various kinds of works that also talk about the way that people are put into debt, economic debt, a debt of personal freedom in Philippines, historically and today. Here we have the pairing of the works of Imo de Maderos and Sahej Rahal. Imo is from Benin and living in Paris. His work here called the Voodoo Knots, and in fact bringing in African voodoo cultures, use of cowrie shells with these kind of Afrofuturist symbols of the helmets that are covered in cowrie shells. So with that, we pair the work of Sahej Rahal, who in fact was an artist who did make a research visit to Korea, and he has a series of paintings which are shown in the Yangne Mountain, and the work behind me, which is called Basinda. And Basinda is this 12-legged creature, which is a kind of geologic animalesque creature, which is also programmed very much through AI, looking really into gaming cultures and the mythification of historical and contemporary trajectories. So the mythification in this work for him links to Hindu mythology, but also the current fascism, which is rising under the authoritarian rule in India today. And so the creature is in a sense acting out in virtual worlds, but very much referencing the necropolitics that is at play in India today.
As part of our exhibition, of course, we have a very strong feminist commitment. This is something that we deem highly important also in the context of Korea, in the context of the gender precarity and gap. And we've been following very closely the online feminist campaigns, the aspects of techno-feminism, and the politics of the feminist artists from the 70s onwards. So of course, from the new generation of artists, also it was really important for us also to look at the gender dimensions of online gaming, and what happens also with female gamers and the kind of at times violence that they experience in the online world. Anna Maria Milan is a Colombian artist we've invited last year to do a gaming workshop with us. She's very interested in live action role play and into the participatory collaborative notions of live action role play, because as she creates these scenarios for the LARPers, she also mirrors them into her own work. And her work is mostly animation based, even though she makes also beautiful watercolor paintings, I must say. And for her, what matters is how can we also create meaning in a form that is the animation by pointing out to the injustices in the world, whether it is vis-a-vis women, or whether it's of ecological concerns, or whether it's state and military violence. So for us, to be able to have invited her here and to work with us on site with feminist collectives like the Famers on site and develop characters and scenarios together over a week, and to be able to feed that into her work, which is a newly commissioned game, as you can see and you can play here, was very important. This is an artist, Tishan Husu, who can show you how prophetic artists can be. They can tap into the times, but they can also tap to the future to come. He studied architecture at MIT in Boston, and started thinking a lot about the relationship of human body vis-a-vis technology, but about 30 years ago. So as we commoners, mortals, we started thinking about these topics maybe in the last 5-10 years. He's been already speculating on them for 30 years. The relationship between skin and surface, robotic parks, surveillance aesthetics that you can find not only in pandemic control, but also in medical facilities. And for him, it's not a doomsday scenario. For him, it's not a dystopian vision. For him, it's actually, you know, how to create affect vis-a-vis cyborgian speculations. So you can see various oral edifices peeking through these beautiful silk screen that he does with photo collages. You can see some thermostat dials that are coming in. So he tests different possibilities on the surface of these digital collages within a very reductive, minimalist aesthetic. So he was actually coming through a generation that was pursuing more reduced forms, but going into a direction that we've only come around now, especially when we're discussing our co-evolution with artificial intelligence. You know, in the future, are we going to be cyborgian pets? Or in the future, how do humans really get to survive the algorithmic regimes that we're now all part of? So he's been thinking a lot about it vis-a-vis his architectonic paintings. He's been thinking a lot about it through his sculptures. But this is also a work we'd like to highlight, a wonderful wallpaper he's done for us on the ramp of the exhibition, where you can also see the skin-like membrane through which you will see television screens protruding. Again, it is all about effect and what does this image do to our senses, rather than a critique of technology onto our bodies. So for him, it is almost technology is within, and how does it manifest through the forms of bodily presence.
Behind me is the work of Angelo Plesas, an artist based in Athens who is currently with us in Gwangju now. He is working with a quilt maker in Gwangju. In fact, for many of these exquisite soft material sculptures that you see behind me, and there is also going to be within that the unveiling of the noospheric society. the term the noosphere was founded by philosophers and geologists. And Angelo is very, very invested into understanding the role of technology and cybernetics in our everyday life. Once more really looking at conditions of spiritual practice and terrains of common practices, thinking about modes of pedagogy, in fact. So a lot of his projects take place as performances, as workshops, and as guided meditations as well, which he did as part of our education program too. Inside you'll also see various video works. Angelo has collaborated with a shaman, Shaman Dodam, who is also featured in the video works that you see inside, and very much kind of thinking about our addiction to technology and technical gadgets, and at the same time, what does a digital detox even mean during a time of pandemic? What can we do to create a sense of silence, a sense of balance within our minds and our hearts? So that's something about Angelo's work, and hopefully more to discover behind the silver curtain. Beside me are the works of Rajni Pereira, a Sri Lankan artist based in Toronto. Rajni has been creating these mask sculptures, elaborate costumes, and also we will have a closer look at her painting, which is just on the left side. She's thinking very much about communities or people of color, minority communities, and those who are not generally represented within the mainstream milieu of a kind of a nationalist cultural prototype. And in many ways, she's really thinking with these protagonists as a person of color herself, as a woman, as an agent who wants to try and think about a future that is, again, ecologically desirable. Very much of her work is thinking about the kind of environmental catastrophes that we are shaping today. So she started actually making these masks before the pandemic, but they become even more kind of eerie, absurd as kind of these predicting systems really of what we might need to do for the future to survive. And also the question, who will survive? Because a lot of indigenous cultures have been erased. Their wisdom, their knowledge has not fully been transmitted to the next generation due to neoliberalization and capitalism. In a sense, much of this indigenous knowledge, this encyclopedic indigenous knowledge and life principles are not acknowledged and enacted, and Rajni calls that forth in the kind of figuration that she creates as future migrants who will cross from one world to the next.
Here we are at our final gallery, which is titled Matriarchy in Motion. Here we are looking at what it means to be maternal and how we actually draw from the collective wisdom of matriarchal cultures. We have historical loans from the two museums, Museum of Shamanism and Gahoe Museum, that we collaborated with. We have also works by older generation artists as well as younger, always looking at feminist practices and the female body's perception in society with contemporary twists. So you will actually see the work of Lynn Hirschman-Lazon, which is a collaboration developed with the biologically inspired engineering department at Harvard University, where she has set up a living sculpture that in itself is including plastic-eating enzymes that are being processed through an image she created, etched on an acrylic panel, which is a continuation of her Water Woman series that she started from the 70s onwards. So here you have a living sculpture that is processing contaminated water through the image of a woman that she's been exploring through the last 40 years in her work, or now it's 50 years? Oh no, it's 50 years now, amazing. And how the Times also induces collaborations with unexpected non-human forms like bacteria. Another part of her work is also working with electricity, and that has also the same effect to deal with microplastics and their pollution in the water and in the oceans across the world. So Lynn Hirschman liaison has been looking at various aspects of a relationship between technology and humans, including genetic manipulation, including surveillance, and she's been doing it from very early on, for basically since the 70s, and this is her latest work that is referencing to an earlier work of hers. That type of dynamic you can also see in Lillian Lin's work. We have two installations by her, one from her 80s practice, The Electric Bride, and the other work that is actually her latest commission that we're featuring. And there you can also see her ongoing exploration over the past decades. She's an artist born in the 30s, in 39 I believe, so imagine. And she is non-stop young, so in terms of like artistic practices, age means nothing when it comes to woman artists, let's say. And you can see her ongoing relationship between kinetics and poetry in both works, one early one and one last one. And an important commission we've also undertaken is by Femke Herregaven, a Dutch artist who joined us in one of our earlier trips to do research on site. This is pre-pandemic times where we could travel and do research together, and she was fascinated with the Sumbori sound of the Heyo, the freedivers of the Jeju Island, which is known by its matriarchal heritage as well. And as you know, the freedivers are also a symbol of resistance in many ways, and the way they organize themselves tells a lot about the importance of communal forms and about community relations. So she worked with them together with a sound composer that she invited, and started recording their sounds, the voice that they make as they come out of the water, where there's that repulsing of this carbon monoxide from their lungs. And she is basically looking at the potential of the voice that might be the first emerging thing after catastrophe, but drawing it also to an earlier mythology that we might actually be coming more from semi-aquatic animals rather than the male hunter that we always learn from. So you will experience the aquatic choir in the structure that she built, the Bultoic structure, which is also inspired by the Heyo's earlier communal gathering places, within which you're going to also see sculptures that she created that are based on the larynxes of our human bodies, as well as some harpoons that resurfaced on the Korean shorelines from the Dutch colonial period.
Thank you so much for joining us on this tour. We can let you know that the job of artistic directors and our international team has been more than difficult. It has been a very, very challenging journey, yet we are honored to be working here. We have done our best. We have been supported by a young team of coordinators, of educators, and we want you to know that it has been difficult, but we are here. You have seen the result. Please visit our external venues as well, which are free to public.
And spring is coming, so is the exhibition, so we hope you get to use this space as much as you wish. Especially the ground floor is waiting for your activation. We cannot wait to connect all these topics to your classrooms, to your family homes. And so let's bring this exhibition alive and bring these discussions also to our everyday lives together with you. Thank you very much.